Okay, we're going to continue where we left off. So, reasons for negotiating treaties. I've already mentioned some of the more broad aspects of why Indigenous people may have negotiated treaties. Think about it this way. So, do we have a seating plan in this class?
No.
No, we do not. But all of you generally know where you sit. Okay. Now, where you sit isn't a problem considering everyday block B, your class shows up here. Okay, but what if tomorrow there's another set of grade 9s who comes in at the same time as your class? Then what? Okay, what if there's 60 kids in this classroom? How many desks do I have? I have 35 desks. There's 60 kids in the classroom. What happens?
Some people don't get desks.
Some people don't get desks. Some people don't get chairs. Now, out of curiosity, here we'll do a little experiment. You all have to participate. Raise your hand. How many of you would give up your chair and desk? Okay. How many of you would insist that no, this is my chair and desk. I'm in this class. Okay. Now of those with your hands up, how many of you would be willing to get violent? Oh, even more hands. Okay. So
you people will.
none of this. You people. You're all the same people. Okay.
Your kind. You see the way he's
All right, boys, simmer down. Hockey boys just like to get aggressive, you know. Now, some of you didn't partake in the vote. Is it because you think you're better than us? What do you mean? Who said yes over there? You definitely voted. You said you'd get violent. I don't think you would. I don't think many of you would. Now, the reason, grade 9s, why I make that reference is because it's important to understand, particularly for Indigenous peoples, when European settlers started showing up, they occupied the same space. There's a really good case study we look at in grade 10, the Beatuk people, that talks about what happens when two people try to occupy the same space and can't come to a peaceful resolution. How many of you know about Israel and Palestine? Oh, you're breaking my hearts, kids. Okay, do you know about Israel? Did they not teach you about the Holy Land in religion class?
Israel. I know that.
Okay. So Israel, what is known and referred to as Israel or Palestine right now, is the Holy Land of the Jews. It is considered holy to Muslims, and it's considered holy to Christians as well. For the Jews, it's considered the Promised Land, the land that God gave them. For the Christians, it's holy because that's where Jesus did his Jesus stuff, right? Which they should teach you about religion, but I don't know, maybe they don't. And for the Muslims, why is it holy? I don't know, because we like Moses and Jesus, and some well-known Islamic figures in the past did some stuff there, right? So when two groups of people who are different occupy the same space, you can't always get a good, easy fit, right? Especially if there's more people than you know what to do with. So 60 students are trying to occupy this room. Well, we only have 35 chairs. Now, we could be clever. We could say we have 35 chairs and 35 desks, which means that all 60 people can sit on something. But now imagine if I bring in 30 grade 9s from, let's say, Norway, and they speak Norwegian. How are you going to negotiate with 30 Norwegian kids? How are you going to communicate? I like that, okay? This young man over here suggests, you just point, right? You just point, right? But let's say like you point like
Universal language.
Like that, right, to the chair. Okay, that's pretty simple. But how do I point, get the hell out of my room?
Yeah.
You, and all of y'all can get out, right? So it makes it very complicated, right? We have some questions here. I'll take some questions. Yes, of course. You have a question as well. Oh. That's, is that better?
Why does that one close a little bit?
This one doesn't really want to close that way. Better?
No, we need to close that last one. Yeah, the last one. Yeah, the last one's like
No, for the love of God, we're not vampires. We're not living in the dark here, okay? So I already mentioned how in Canada I'm sorry, this guy looks so much like Trudeau, that's insane. That's so uncanny. This guy here, he actually looks like Trudeau. It's uncanny. It's weird. Okay. Anyways, I already discussed yesterday how Canada was trying to build a railway across from one side of the country to the other. And some of you have driven across the country. It's very long. Part of the reason they wanted to do that was to connect and unify Canada as a country. And the other reason that I'm aware of, but isn't very commonly expressed, is that they were worried about American invasion. Okay, also, that student has been gone for a while. We need to do something about that. Okay. Now, generally, I don't know how much the second point is believed. There were early attempts at cooperation, like we celebrate Thanksgiving Day. The history of Thanksgiving Day is that the indigenous peoples and the first European settlers, they needed one another to survive for a long time. And so, hopefully, I would like to believe that generally speaking, people want to avoid war and conflict. And I think most people do. And that relates to the personality trait of agreeableness. People who are high in agreeableness, they will avoid conflict, whether it's verbal or physical. People low in agreeableness will enjoy conflict, right? Potentially. And so it's interesting, when you start looking into the cultural differences as well and whatnot, it gets complicated. But we have some depictions of some battles there. Now, in the United States, things were very different. They're very violent, but we're not the United States, so we're good. Yes?
What does that word mean? Like that old word?
Which one?
No, the word that you said.
Which one?
The one that...
What did you just say? Agreeable. So one way to understand it is agreeableness is on a spectrum. You have people who are high in agreeableness, people who are low in agreeableness. The people who are high in agreeableness, they don't like conflict, meaning if someone disagrees with them, they won't know how to express that, hey, actually, I don't like this. Right? So a high agreeable person would walk into the room and see their chair is being occupied by someone else, and they'll just find somewhere else to sit. They don't want that conflict. A low agreeable person would say, hey, that's my spot. A very low agreeable person might just drag them, yank them out, right?
What about the person who's straight in the middle?
Someone who's in the middle may decide, right? So let's say someone who's in the middle and they know the person sitting, they might bug them, right? Let's say it's their friend, like, hey man, you're in my spot today. But if they don't know the person, then they'll have to make a decision. That decision can be made on several reasons. If they think hey, I can beat this person in a verbal or physical disagreement, we'll call it, maybe they'll, I don't know if you kids do this anymore, but back in my day, we would actually just grab the bottom of a chair like this and just yank.
I should have done that.
I use that to my sister.
I think I've done that on several occasions to a friend who stole my chair. It's certainly not fun having it done to you. So as already mentioned yesterday, for many First Nations people, they wanted to secure their future, and that's a very common experience, right? Like all of you should agree that you'd like to have a better future than you have a present life. Okay. Now, in your life, in your experience, you might choose to do that through several methods, right? We mentioned yesterday, like focusing in class, getting good grades. Actually, that's my block C. Getting good grades to make sure that you could do higher education if you wanted to. Applying for a job so that you have job experience and some money. Maybe it's having new experiences like joining a team, joining a club so that you have a very experienced life. All of these things set you up for your future to make you more competent and better equipped at handling problems. And I think that that's ideal. You want to be able to make sure that 5-10 years from now, you're more capable of handling problems, whatever they happen to be, than you are now. How do you go about doing that? Great question to ask is, does school even prepare you to solve your problems 5-10 years down the road? Another great question is, do you even know what those problems could be? Some of them are very common. Some of them might be unique to you. Getting back to the slide here in the curriculum, so for indigenous people, on the right side we see someone suffering from smallpox, of disease. At the bottom we see a depiction of traditional hunting and gathering lifestyle, so acquiring food, making sure you don't starve. Right? Nobody sitting in this classroom right now wants to be starving 10 years from now, not able to pay for food or acquire food. You also don't want to be sickly and diseased. You can leave it on my desk.
I don't know who would want to be starving in general.
No, being hungry is terrible. I hate it. So again, these images are depicting and showing how the way of life for indigenous people is changing. At the top left, you see a mountain of bison skulls. I don't know the full history behind this photo, but obviously, as you can tell, you know, that's a lot of animals. Look, I mean, just look at how this guy's standing, just perspective. I mean, there's like maybe 10 skulls there. So clearly, this is very high up. And they have like the king bison up there because that skull is ginormous compared to the rest. And it goes back quite a bit. So for a variety of reasons, particularly related to the fur trade, a lot of the bison were being shot for their fur. Okay. Has anyone here handled bison leather? It's pretty tough. It's very durable. What experience do you have? Do you have a jacket?
No.
What is your experience with bison leather?
My grandpa.
Man, just because he's old doesn't mean he's got bison leather. It's still skin.
No. He has like.
What?
No, it's fine.
No, what is it?
He has like a jacket thing.
So it isn't.
I said jacket. You said no. Yeah. I have a motorcycle jacket. It's made from bison leather, and it's very heavy. And you know, hopefully, well, God forbid, I hope I never fall off my motorcycle while I'm riding. I do.
What kind of motorcycle is
It's Suzuki Boulevard. Hopefully, you know, that will protect me against sliding across the pavement. But bison fur, like how many of you have a fur jacket? Like animal fur. Animal fur, you know, people feel a type of way about this, and we'll watch a documentary about this for this chapter, for kind of an interesting documentary. People feel a type of way about animal fur and animal products, but the reality is, kids, they're actually some of the best products to use. I mean, I have a sheepskin coat over there. It keeps me very warm. So warm. Better than like a modern material jacket. Okay, but they use these fur. They made products out of them. They sold them. It was a very valuable resource. Here we see the construction of the railway. So they are carving through the land and reshaping it to their vision, whatever that happens to be. And that's very common of our society nowadays. And some people would say it's necessary. Some people would say it's destructive. But it just relates to the different way of life. Okay, so lo and behold, another topic we already discussed in the first lecture. Multiple perspectives on treaties. So the thing about history is very complicated. How many of you journal? On occasion, journal. You just write down things that happened in your day, things that bothered you about your life. How many of you do that? Okay, it's about 4 of us. So 100 years from now, when anthropologists and archaeologists, like people who like dig and learn about human history and animal history, when they're digging, they'll only know about 4 people from this class. The rest of you will just disappear and fade into history.
Well, that's hypothetical.
It's a good thing.
No.
I'm forced to. My therapist makes me.
Oh, hey, faithful.
It's a good thing though.
No, it's not.
It's very good. So the challenge with history is that if people are not writing down their life and their perspective, what will be remembered about them 10, 50, 100 years later? Nothing, right? Maybe. Yes.
What if they wrote like a ton of like stories and writing and stuff like that?
Okay, so let's say they did some sort of career that was very productive and they produced work that was remembered.
Yeah.
Right, so how many of you know Mr. Suko?
I did.
Okay. How many of you know that Mr. Suko has written a book?
Yeah.
Right? So his book will exist after him, hopefully. Right? But the challenge with history is that you can only rely on the accounts written by the people who were there. And then you got to ask yourself, so I did an interesting little writing exercise about this in university. Maybe we could do it in this class, although we don't have to. If you were to write about your morning, your day so far, what things would you include?
What you ate?
Waking up,
What you ate?
what you ate for breakfast. What else would you write about if you had to write one page, one piece of paper, one page about what you did today so far, right? It is currently 11, no way it's 11:30. Is it actually 11:31? Holy, class is gonna end in 10 minutes?
No, class ends at 12 today.
Class, well, thank you, okay.
Damn it.
Oh, you kids. My grade 12s did that to me last year. They got me so good. In 10 seconds, these kids were down the hall gone. They had left the school in 10 seconds. They cleared out 20 minutes early. Okay, what else would you write about today?
What clothes you wore?
What clothes you wore you can include?
What you read in social class?
What book you read in social class? How many of you grade 9s, if you had to write that down, a little exercise, what I did today so far, how many of you would write down that I put my feet onto the floor? The floor was cold. I stood up. I took up my right step first, then my left step. No.
No one would.
How many of you, although you ate how many of you ate breakfast, by the way? Okay. For those of you who ate breakfast, how many of you would include that into your, maybe 2 of you, right? So it's, the point I'm making here, grade 9s, is that people choose to include different things in their accounts, right? And people choose to write about very different things because they see the world in a very unique way as an individual. You know, if I were to slip and fall right now, how many of you would include that into your what I did today? How many of you would include, I wish I had laughed harder than I did? How many of you would have done a little jig? You know, a little dance, celebrated. So, people's perspective can vary greatly. And on that discussion from yesterday and today, some people, grade 9s, let's rein it in. Remember, your voices are being recorded. Some people some groups have a very different group on ownership. Right, so you boys play hockey. Do you share your equipment? No. Why not? Because it's yours. Because it stinks. Very different reasons for not wanting to share. Right?
I don't know who would want to share their disgusting hockey equipment with other people.
We're feeling pretty restless, grade 9, so maybe now I want to give you some time to work on your questions as well. Maybe we'll wrap up in 5 minutes, which would mean, no, our class ends at 12. Okay, we'll go to 45, maybe. So there are different perspectives on how you retain history as well. For some people, they have an oral tradition. For example, Arabs and Muslims, they have they used to have an oral history and an oral tradition. In Arab culture, prior to Islam, people who could recite large lengths of poetry from memory were valued. It was a valuable, desirable trait. It was something that was admired. Okay, this idea of telling stories. Boys, okay, you can come sit where? No, that would be a terrible idea. You go sit over there. Okay, take your stuff with you. Now the challenge with an oral history is how do you maintain it? Okay, first of all, do we understand what an oral history is? Okay.
It's speaking.
Speaking, right? So we tell a story, right? The story you might say about this class is, oh, it sucked. Okay, well, if your story's 2 words, it's pretty easy to maintain. But if your story is, the class was so wonderful, I have so many things to say about it, but I can't say them all because right now I'm teaching a lesson. Okay, how do you maintain that story? Is it possible to maintain an oral story, a spoken story over, 100 years? I'll take Sarah first and then.
Yeah, you pass it down to the next generation and
Okay.
then keep repeating it.
Yeah, keep repeating it. What did you want to add?
There might be an issue with that because some people like shortcuts and they might like cut around the story, make it shorter, easier to remember.
Right? And so, you might have a very long story. You might have someone who's a very good storyteller and they know how to add and build suspense, create drama. They know how to dramatize a particular part to add emphasis and to quicken another part to speed things up. And so one of the things particularly which is easy to do with storytelling, maybe not so much historical interpretations of history, is you look at the similarities between stories. So if you see, I have a poster over here of the hero's journey. The hero's journey is not a particular story, but it is a meta story. It's events that you can follow from most stories of progress and growth. Right? So if you've seen Harry Potter, if you've seen Lord of the Rings, if you've seen like even Iron Man, all these people have a hero's journey. They follow certain elements. And so with narration, like language arts, English stuff, you can extract some of those details. But when it comes to history, it can be very complicated. Additionally, what do you do when everyone who knew the story dies? But then 50 years later, people have an interpretation of that story. How valid is that? Can we really accept that? Is it okay for me to tell a story about you that I wasn't present for?
Yes.
Yes? Why is that?
Well, I mean, it depends on who told you the story first. And then,
Okay, so
after the
you
story,
told me a story about him
I told you a story about him.
that you didn't see
Alright.
because you heard it from him.
Okay.
And so I heard it from you and you heard it from him, but none of us were present.
Okay.
Then what?
Then it would be very accurate.
Then it might not be accurate, right? It's hearsay, it's potential, right? But let's say you tell me a story about her and you were there, and you tell me. Is that? It's not terrible, right? You're getting it directly. You're getting it from a first source, not directly, right? She would have to tell me the story. Right? But part of it is that the more people, like let's say, so there's this individual. He has a show on Netflix called Meat Eater, Steven Ranella. He's a hunter. So while he was out filming an episode of his show, they were in Alaska somewhere, their camp was attacked by a giant grizzly bear. Okay, so imagine now there's 5 students sitting here. Imagine a giant grizzly bear jumps in and attacks this group. Okay, so now there's 5 perspectives to the same story. Whose perspective is correct? Is there a correct perspective? All of them are correct because it's their own interpretation. That's interesting. That puts a challenge to this document then. Because let's say as the grizzly bear attacks, one of them thinks that, oh, it was like this big, it was ginormous. Right? Let's say the other person thought, oh, it was a wolf because they saw it out of the corner of their eye and they just started running. Let's say if the one of them might think, oh, it was Bigfoot. I swear, I saw it with my own 2 eyes. It was Bigfoot. It was standing up. Okay, whose perspective is correct then?
The person
Why
was
wasn't there?
shooting.
Right. What's that?
The person was shooting the thing because he saw it.
Yeah. Well, the camera don't lie, right?
Exactly.
So I'm just trying to make you think more about this idea. It's this it's hard to tell who's right or wrong. Now, obviously, if you have a written document and that document has been preserved through history, that document will state what was agreed to. And so that brings a challenge to these different perspectives of should we write stuff down and adhere to what we wrote down, or should we have a transient flowing understanding of what the agreement was because of an oral history and tradition. And I'm not sure what the right answer is. Okay. We will stop there.